All right, you sternocleidomastoid lickers, how the heck are you? It's friendly neighborhood Kamiko Z coming at you, live via recording. I realize that it's been just a little bit of time between the last training and video that I've done and now, so I figured I would hammer one out for you. Um, the current topic of the day is mobile knowledge. Now, this isn't going to be like a super in-depth dive into using mobile devices during software testing. It's going to be more or less a high-level approach into it, conceptual based, and um, really the majority of the knowledge that I have on mobile testing. I don't do it a heck of a lot. I haven't worked for companies that have needed it a heck of a lot. A lot of companies ask for it nowadays, but this should give you some insight as to some starting points of things that you can start taking a look at and start figuring things out on your own. Because ultimately, I can give you a lot of information, but if you don't start applying it and start using it and start figuring out the additional pieces that I may have overlooked or forgotten or just don't know, you're not going to do very well in the industry. There's a lot of reverse engineering and figuring out and filling in plot points that I can't really teach about. So, uh, for today, this is just going to give you some additional information that should help you out in your path and your journey in becoming a software tester, or at least adopting some of the mentalities and traits that a software tester might have. So, mobile knowledge. Let's go over the glossary of terms for the remainder of this. I don't have anything. I didn't really have anything formally prepared for this. I've been thinking about it for the last few hours, and to be honest with you, my eyes are tired, my brain's tired, even my throat's a little bit tired from the amount of talking I've done in the last few hours. Um, and so I might lose track of where I'm at. I might lose focus, motivation, overall enthusiasm, and I apologize for that if it seems like I'm a typical boyfriend after being with each other for 15 months. So the terms, I think we've gone over some of these terms in the past, but we'll go over them again for this lesson because it's important. DOM is one. Compatibility, engine, design, emulator, virtual machine, resolution, dev tools, and Bluestacks. Now, DOM, what the DOM is, it's basically uh, a resting place or a holding place for code before a particular uh, system or browser or engine starts to play with it. So let me think of I don't even have good analogies prepared for what these things are like or what they mean in the real world. Um, but a good representation of this. Let's imagine that the DOM is a well. You remember doing those coloring books where they have numbers in each section, and you fill out the colors according to the number assignment in each section, and at the end it's supposed to have the right colors that were intended for the picture. Um, the DOM is basically what uh, the holding place for that information. It's the blank page. Okay, it's the blueprint for making that page. Okay, um, and what happens is that different people come in and they fill out that blueprint. So different designers, programmers, they come in and say, okay, we think that this horse should be pink. So we're going to assign the horse the numeric value of pink. And they put that in. And the next people come along and go, no, no, no. A horse needs to be green, and so they fill out the numerical value of green. And so the DOM is basically the framework or the blueprint. And what the browser does, each browser is different in the way that it reads and interprets the DOM. Each one has an engine underneath that reads the DOM and interprets it in a different way. Now, there are a lot of browsers that are similar with each other, or are similar in the way that they react to and interpret what's put into the DOM. But they're not all the same, right? So, and it could be the difference between like chestnut brown and light chestnut brown. Like, not a huge difference, but still a difference. It could be something as vast as functional differences, where the framework for it shows that the horse should be running, and for whatever reason, the engine or the interpreter decides that the horse is kicking a cow in the balls super hard, or I guess a bowl in the balls super hard. And so then the picture changes, even though it's still called horse running in field. It's kicking a bowl in the balls. And so it ends up kind of distorting and convoluting the intention of pages when you have all these different browsers that are interpreting the same code in different ways, and making it work differently. Over time, developers have basically given up on trying to make basically having one kind of code for all browsers, since all browsers, the manufacturers of them, have decided differently about these functional and visual differences, so that developers end up writing different code depending on the browser that's doing the interpreting. There are actually ways in the code itself that once it's loaded in, once it's in the DOM, the browser comes down and grabs it and interprets it, and they have a way of telling the browser, ignore this code if you're this browser, ignore this code if you're this browser. Or saying things like, if you're this browser, read this code only, and if you take that chunk of code for that browser and a different chunk of code for a different browser, they could look and behave exactly the same way. Whereas if you got the same code and put it into both, you could have different looks and different functionality entirely. And so working as a developer on a online platform, specifically using browsers, it's a little bit more tricky than just writing HTML and CSS. You have to write a lot more for a lot other reasons. And the same thing goes with QA. As you're doing software testing, you can't just take one browser and say, oh, it worked in this browser, so obviously it's going to work in all of these others. It's not the case. So the DOM is basically the blueprint resting spot for the intention of code. The browser itself has an engine that interprets and extrapolates that information and displays it onto the page for you. Now, I need to talk about compatibility, because this is very, very important and is very, very huge in the consequences if you don't understand it or apply it. So if you've ever used a Windows system before, you likely have come across a program that you've tried to run where it says, I can't run this in your current operating system. I have to run this in compatibility mode. And basically Windows pretends to be a different OS. Like currently I'm on Windows 10. It's like trying to run a program that's only supposed to work on Windows XP. And then you tell Windows, okay, pretend like you're Windows XP while you're running this program. And so sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. Sometimes the the restrictions and the issues that the program has are a little bit more uh, structurally related than simply saying what operating system you are. Now, the problem with this is that typically and basically speaking, running in compatibility mode is not a true switch to the intended engine or functionality. Okay. Um, Let me think of a good way of explaining this. Let's say that we're in a Tesla. Okay. Um, a vehicle, not the man. That would be odd. Let's say we're in a vehicle. One of the I don't know. I almost said Series 7. That's BMW. Let's just I don't care. Pick a Tesla, anyone, doesn't matter. So we're in a Tesla, right? And we can test out that Tesla, right? We can drive it, we can turn the wheel, we can do all this stuff, push all the buttons on the inside, hold buttons down. We can do all these things with the Tesla vehicle. Now let's pretend we want to test an earlier version of the same model. Okay, maybe something that's 3 years older, but still within the same generation suite of that vehicle. Um, if you want to do a good, real, true test, you would park that car, get out, get into an actual 3-year-old, same series generation or different generation, same series vehicle, and drive it around and perform all the same tests. However, what compatibility mode does is it changes the first car's behavior to make it seem like it's the earlier version. So let's say in this Tesla vehicle, there's a way that you can set it and say pretend that you're 3 years old. And so it downloads the updates, latest updates for that vehicle, and you're now running with that operating system. All the actual pieces and parts are all new, but it's the car pretending to be 3 years old. You still got the same engine, you still got the same transmission, same battery, same cords, everything like that, but it looks like a 3-year-old version car. That's what compatibility mode is. It's the same engine as the original thing you started out with, but it just looks different. And that's important because if we're talking about functionality in a web page and you're running a browser in compatibility mode, whether it be an operating system compatibility mode or a browser compatibility mode, you're changing the foundational aspect of your test. You can't perform accurate functional tests from a system that's only merely pretending to have the functionality that you're looking for. And I tried to explain that slowly, and I'm sorry if that doesn't make sense, but compatibility mode is essentially pretending to be what you want while not actually being what you want. Now, a lot of people and a lot of places sign up for compatibility mode primarily because it's cheap. You can find all sorts of cheap solutions out there for systems that pretend to be other systems. Getting the actual system can sometimes be difficult or downright impossible. So something is better than nothing. For example, try finding a Windows XP operating system install disk that's new, that's not used or doesn't have the potential of being tampered with. It's kind of difficult to find one. However, there are businesses that still use Windows XP. And if you need to test what a piece of browser software will look like with a Windows XP operating system and an Internet Explorer 7 browser, you're better off having the actual setup of that than going to a website that that basically builds out compatibility versions of that and delivering it to you. For example, there's a company called Sauce Labs, Sauce Labs, they advertise that you can jump on and you can select an operating system and a browser and a location, and it will create what's called a virtual machine, which is right here, virtual machine, um, which is like a computer within a computer. Okay, so like right here, I have my setup. I have my screens. I have my desktop here. I can create a program inside of my desktop that pretends to be a separate desktop. And I can install whatever operating system on there that I want. I could put uh, a Linux operating system and run it from my Windows platform. Now, it's not going to be exactly the same. It's going to be a little bit different, but it's going to be close, right? That's the differences are at a much later conversation. It's a little bit more involved to get into the differences between a virtual machine system and an actually installed system. There are differences, but for the sake of this, we're just talking about the Sauce Labs group, who makes a virtual machine for you with your specified operating system that you select, with a specified browser, and it opens that browser to a specified address that you put into it. Now, I thought this is a cool idea, a cool concept, and still I started playing with it and started testing it against actual old hardware that I had laying around. I actually had like a Windows XP system and Internet Explorer 7 on there. So I booted it up, went into the company's page that I was currently looking at and testing, and compared the Sauce Labs output to my actual hardware, and they were different. And through some additional research and tech support emails with the Sauce Labs group, I found out that they're running their operating systems in compatibility mode. They basically have a bunch of keys for like Windows 10, and they say, okay, run Internet Explorer 7 in XP compatibility mode. And when it boots up the same engine as Windows 10. So it's the same functionality as Windows 10, but the visual look of it is of Windows XP with Internet Explorer 7. But the functionality behaves as though it were a modern day system and not a 20-year-old system. And that's the key. If you're testing functionality, you cannot rely on compatibility mode to do the work for you. Let me show you an example here of how you would do something like that. Okay, I apologize for my desktop. But I was trying to get Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2007 running on my Windows 10 system. And this is a old game. This is 14 years old. So if I right click on it and I go down to properties, there's a compatibility section over here. And I can run this in compatibility mode. You can even have a compatibility troubleshooter here, which will go through and say, okay, I think I have a solution for this. I think you should try to run this as Windows XP Service Pack 3. And so you can say that, and I've done this before, and I clicked OK, and that's how it's currently checked to run Windows XP Service Pack 3. That's what they want you to do. It wants the program to think that it's running Windows XP when in fact it's running in Windows 10. And so that's basically what you would do. You tell the program, you tell Windows to tell the program that it's not Windows 10 and see what the program does with it. Even though I don't have Windows XP installed on here, and that's kind of the key, is I don't have the engine to run Windows XP. I have Windows 10 with a different engine that's being interpreted and used for this compatibility mode. So yeah, that's what compatibility mode means. And I'm going to be talking about the DOM a lot. I'm going to be talking about compatibility mode I'm going to be saying engine a lot. And remember, the engine is what controls the functionality, okay? Design, that's something different entirely. That's just the way it looks, right? Like if you were to take the engine out of a Volkswagen Bug and you were to put it into a 18-wheeler, could you do that? I don't know. I'm not a mechanic. Could you actually physically take it out and put it into the empty space in an 18-wheeler? Sure, you could. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's not going to change the way the outside of the 18-wheeler looks. It's going to look like everything's fine until you pop the hood and go, what in the name of Lucifer's nostril hairs did you do here? It's going to look exactly the same. And that's the difference. Compatibility means a design difference, not an engine difference. So we're going to be able to see how things look in compatibility mode, but not behave because it's in compatibility mode. Okay, an emulator is something very similar. An emulator attempts to indicate behavior to an extent. An emulator is basically it's an engine that has been hacked into to have different requirements and therefore different output than the original design has been made to work. So, for instance, you can get a Nintendo, regular Nintendo emulator onto your Windows system. Now, your regular Nintendo didn't have save options. You couldn't save your game if you were playing Super Mario Brothers, or for those north of the border, Super Mario Brothers. You couldn't save your game. That wasn't built into the functionality of a Nintendo. But with a Nintendo emulator, you can save the state of a game. So I can play like Super Mario Brothers on my desktop here via an emulator that has very similar functionality to the actual Nintendo console with different other pros and cons associated with it. So it's like they took the engine and they took it apart and they added some other things to it and said, okay, here you go. So it's, in my opinion, an emulator is better than running something in compatibility mode, but it's still not as good as the actual thing. You might get the calculation of the jump off by 1 pixel and screw up an entire game because of the way that you modified the original engine. Okay, virtual machine, I touched on that already. It's a computer within your computer. You basically say, okay, I want you to pretend like you have 32 gigs of memory and an 8-core processor and all these things. You can tell it that even if your computer doesn't have those resources. You're basically simulating the environment, which is better than an emulator. It's definitely better than running in compatibility mode, but it's still not 100% true to reality because you're still kind of forcefully faking what's happening. But it's close enough, it's good enough that a lot of companies do use virtual machines to build out and to put systems in their core infrastructure onto. It's cheaper to do it that way. You can have a bulky server with tons of resources in it because it's easier to build something huge than building a bunch of tiny things. And then from there you virtualize it, right? So you have this big server, it's tons of resources, and then you cut up all the resources into little virtual byte sizes, and with each of those byte sizes you make a different virtual machine, and for a tenth of the cost you can have almost identically the same infrastructure with some minor differences. But if you know what those are, you can work around them really easily. So that's what a virtual machine is. resolution. Now, this isn't like New Year's crap. I wasn't drunk when I wrote this. This is basically the, if you hear 1080p or 600 by 800 or 1600 by 900, we're talking about the number of pixels up versus the number of pixels sideways. And if you multiply those numbers together, that'll tell you how many pixels there are in a screen. Okay, like these screens, they're not 4K screens, they're 1920 by 1080. So whatever that number is, 1920 times 1080, that's how many pixels are in my screen. And the more pixels you have, the more definition that you have. Now, it's not useful to have such a high definition screen like this if the systems that you're going to be testing on and the environment you're going to be testing in is not going to be the same as your screen resolution size. And I'll show you what that means a little bit later. But for now, just realize that your monitor itself can sometimes cause problems when you're testing out web applications or even games. Dev tools and Bluestacks. These are different tools that you can use to get some insight to how mobile devices will be reacting to different things. Okay, I'll show you what I mean here in a minute, but I'm going to kind of give you the lowdown. So first off, when we're talking about mobile testing, the best thing to have always is going to be an actual mobile device, an actual piece of hardware with the default factory settings on it that came from the manufacturer. This is an Android device that I have. I could delete the operating system on here and load in a different Android operating system on here and start getting things working. I shouldn't do that from a testing perspective, because it's not how the manufacturer did it. I want it precisely as the manufacturer has done it, because 99% of the consumers that are going to be using this device are going to have it as the manufacturer made it, not as they've gone in and modified it. So in any mobile scenario, you want to have the actual physical hardware devices to test on. They will be the truest, most accurate representation of appearance and functionality from any other option out there. I don't care who you're talking to about this or what they're selling you. It is never going to be good enough or as good as the actual hardware itself. Okay, so first off, if you have that option, great, use that option. And the knowledge of it really comes from use. If you're not used to using an Android phone, you should probably go to a store and play with one. You don't have to buy it. They have demos out there. Just pick one up, play with it, thumb through it, look at the settings, change some of the settings, change the language to German and watch the salespeople freak out, whatever you want to do. Just go and play with the phone, the tablet, whatever, and learn how it interacts and how it looks. So that's the best way to get mobile knowledge in my opinion. Now, if we're going to be looking at mobile knowledge from a broader perspective, I can't really do this video from any of those stores since social distancing and all that jazz. So instead, I'm going to show you a way to kind of do it with my current setup. So I will say ahead of time, I am not going to show you how to set up a virtual machine to do this. I am not even going to show you how to set up an emulator. I'll show you emulators you can get that are kind of set themselves up. And I might show you compatibility mode. Maybe. But yeah, actually I will be showing you compatibility mode to help explain what it is and what it means. So first off, if you're testing something on a mobile device, you could be testing an application or a browser. Okay, those are going to be the two primary things. Yeah, there's some infrastructure and networking stuff you can do, but the two primary ones are going to be a browser interface or an application. And for those things, there are lots of free resources to do that, which open up either emulators or compatibility mode um, applications to help give you some insight. Google Chrome actually comes with with some compatibility modes, and I'll show you those. You can find those in the Dev Tools. Now, if you ever want to learn more about Dev Tools, just Google Dev Tools Chrome. But over here where it says I need to do an update, you can come down to more tools and you can see developer tools down here, right? If I click on that, you'll see the last thing that I had open, which it shouldn't be doing. Great. So in here we have these tabs down here which give me like the actual HTML of the page, and I can mouse over different elements and it'll show me what aspects of the page I'm hovering over. The console here will show me like, why isn't that? Yeah, will actually show me errors and such in the DOM. Things that it didn't interpret or interact with well, things that it said, hey, you should read this, and the engine went, what is this supposed to be? This doesn't translate to anything for me. It'll show you sources of where information is coming from. So if it has to load in additional libraries and other information for the page to work, you can see that there. It'll show you, like if I refresh this page, please don't break. Okay, it'll show you how long it takes for certain requests to come through. And in that way you can do some sort of performance checking. You actually have a page here for performance checking that'll do some good A/B testing for you. But yeah, you have these developer tools which are here to help you as a developer or also as a software tester to make your job a little bit easier. The people at Google are very good about this. Now, I can go doing it the way that I just showed you, or you can hit F12 on your keyboard. Hit F12, the same thing will come up. So that's a nice shortcut to have. However, this helps us out because in Chrome, it does make it easier for you to see the differences in resolution. Now, when we're talking about compatibility mode and how you see the design changes, you're basically talking about resolution changes. Now, in HTML, when you're writing HTML, you can tell the things on the page to basically have different alignments on the page, right? Like I want this picture to be on the left. So you actually say, be on the left. You can tell it to be in the middle. So it'll be in the middle. Now, what happens to things that you have that are, set up to say, okay, go to the left, go to the right, be in the middle, but need to scale with the rest of the page, right? So if I go to matching video. I just activated my phone somehow. I'm hearing a ringing in my ear. I'm not entirely sure why. I'm not picking anything up. Weird. Must be being activated by some government conspiracy. Sorry, that was very weird and distracting. Totally forgot where I was at too. So yeah, if you need something to scale with the rest of the page, sometimes it's kind of hard to see from your browser. Like let's say I go to Disney here, Disney.com, and I can see this, and in a browser like this, it looks just fine, right? Nothing wrong with this. It looks like it's well centered, good spacing between content. There's not too much on the page to confuse you, but there's not so little that you don't know what's going on. You got a nice banner up at the top here, a place to search, good scrolling mechanic, like just basically it looks okay, right? Looks good. So let's open up the dev tools. And you can see in here, like go to the console, there's some stuff in here with that the engine couldn't really quite read, or some errors that it came into contact with. But one thing that we can do, if you take a look in the top left of that, and so, sometimes this will actually appear on the right hand side. Okay. I sometimes have mine at the bottom, sometimes I have it on the right hand side. Let's keep it on the right hand side for now. But regardless of its orientation on the screen in the top right, you're going to see select an element in the page to inspect it, but next to it you have a toggle device toolbar. If I click on that, you can now see up here that I have a drop down of devices I can select from that Chrome is been programmed to display information like. Okay, not behave like those devices, but display the information like it. Okay, so right now I'm in landscape mode. So if I click this to rotate it, this would be like holding an iPhone X phone in your hand, and you were to open up a browser, a Chrome browser, and an iPhone X, and go to Disney.com. This is what it would look like. It doesn't mean this is the way it would behave, but this is what it would look like. So I could scroll up and down. You can see up here that there's a menu that it cuts off on the edge here, and you can't really see the slide bar to indicate that you can drag this. And I am holding down the mouse button to simulate putting my finger on the screen and dragging it across. But you can do that, which indicates that perhaps they needed to do some modifications to their sizing of their header to be more compatible with an iPhone X. Okay, not a knock against Disney. I'm making off-the-cuff observations. I have no idea why this is set up the way it is. But now you can see what it would look like as an iPhone X user going to Disney.com. Now, it doesn't mean that's the way it's going to function, but it's the way it's going to be presented. So I can scroll down, and I can also click and move like I'm using my finger. Like if I put my finger on a link and drag, does it activate the link or does it drag? And I can keep going down and doing all that, right? And so I can click on one of these. Like, yeah, what if I click on that? It's going to load in the page. It's going to show me what it would look like. And here it's even saying, like, the website is detecting that I'm using a browser or a mobile configuration. And so Disney has responsive code to mobile configurations to give to the user the option to use their app. Like if I were to go on this on just my like we were just here, right? What did I click on? It was this one. Click on this. Is it going to say? It's not saying, do you want to load into the App Store? It's saying, okay, well, we see that you're Gunkel. That's my name on Disney Plus. But it's not saying, do you want to open this in the App Store? But in the actual simulated version, it's saying, do I want to open this in the App Store? In an iPhone X. Now, if this was like, let's change this to what is it? Galaxy S5. So now it comes back and says, do you want to get this on Google Play? Because Google Play is the Samsung S5 equivalent of the App Store. So the browser itself is detecting what technology is being used to access it and presenting different information based on what the developer has coded into and put into the DOM that the different engines are now pulling from and reading from. Okay? So if you want to see how something is going to look, you can use Chrome to see what it would look like on mobile devices. Again, not behave, but look like on mobile devices. So I can change this to an iPad Pro. Let's take a look at an iPad Pro. And let's refresh this to make sure we didn't mess up any kind of orientation. Okay, here's something interesting, okay? Here we see if I can find a piece of code that's really. So now when it's highlighted in blue, it's different sections of the code. So here is where I'm looking at the stars chunk right here. See how everything is in the middle? Even this box down here is in the middle, even though the text is to the left. The stars box here is on the left-hand side. It's not centered like everything else is, which means that this particular chunk of code hasn't been updated to fit the same theme as the rest of the page. So from a design perspective, you can almost claim that there's a design bug with this content. And I'm just trying to make the blue area smaller and more focused on what I want. So here I'm into, okay, right here. Okay, so what I want is this one right here. So I clicked on the element, and down here it's outputting the style for me. Display is block, text align center. So the text is centered, but the box itself is not centered. Anyway, so I would basically go through, wonder if it would be, what is this dev? If I was better with HTML, I could show you how to do this, but essentially you could add in here as a developer, because this is dev tools, or even as a software tester, you could come in here and make this box move over. App body content, normal. So let me go to the text here, right? So border text align center. Let's make it left. Can I not? Is it not going to let me? Okay, let's change that to 45. So you can see that it's changing over there just to show you that you can interact with it. So as I'm putting in numbers, it's changing the spacing between elements on the page. So if I change it to 15, it really expands out. It was at 1.25 before. If I change it to 45, things go off the screen, and now I have to scroll down. But you can change the HTML using the dev tools to then come up with solutions based off of the technology that's loading in. As you've seen, you can change the way it looks, and it responds based off of the tech that you're using. So there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to do a solution like this. And use this to help with troubleshooting. Okay, so yeah, there's an iPad. You can change it to really whatever you want. Here's a Pixel 2. But there, you can tell it things like, you can put in calculations into it and say, okay, I want you to be equally as far from the left side as you are from the right side, which you might say is center, but could sometimes not be centered. Kind of hard to come up with a specific example, but just because you can't think of the specific example doesn't mean there doesn't exist one where that is the example. Sorry, that didn't make any sense. Go back to what I said, flip it, and then reverse it. So compatibility, or not compatibility mode, but this simulated view response in Chrome is really nice for taking a look at that. Now, is it the best for understanding functionality? No, not at all. But from a designer's perspective, from a visual user scenario, you can use this as a software tester to see if it's behaving in the way that you want it to. Another one is this appetize.io. You just go to the browser, and this is going to do the same thing, but with iOS primarily. This has a 60-second timer on it, so I'm not going to be able to do a whole heck of a lot, but you have all these options down here, extra options we didn't have in the previous system. And you have different iOSs you can choose from. So let's go with like iOS 9.3 on an iPhone 5S. See how it changes the resolution and the size of it. You can also see over here you can change the resolution. So if I wanted to do, if I wanted to change it, if I go to responsive, right, and 800 by 600, this is a resolution, right, 1920 by 1080. That's a resolution. See how things got smaller on the page? If I do 800 by 600, which is how monitors used to be, like the spacing is different and looks different and looks actually looks better in 800 by 600 than it does in 1920 by 1080. And I know those numbers just because I've used them a lot. That is the only reason why I know those numbers. Same thing with 1600 by 900. Okay. So you can set this to really whatever you want it to be. Suppose they come up with a new phone with a weird resolution to it, 881 by 1450 for whatever reason. This is what it would look like. And then if you went into landscape mode, this is what it would look like. So yeah, that's essentially how you would use that to look at the design aspect of the code. Now there are some functional things, like let's say that like I already showed you, that this div right here, see how this starts with the div ID class? Let's say that this div actually expanded out to cover the rest of the screen. You wouldn't be able to click on the download at the App Store button because it would be covering it. You could do some checks like that. You can't do all of them, so I wouldn't rely on it too heavily. So here we have iPhone 5S. Let's go with black because we can. Tap to play. It's going to load into the app. And I got 60 seconds until it quits out, right? So here it is. I can click on the center button, and it's going to boot me to the home screen. I can click and drag to go through the different screens. I can click on Safari, and it'll open up Safari. And I can go to Disney.com to have it load in Disney.com. Now, while this looks like an actual iOS device, it doesn't mean that it is. So I had a pop-up there I had to close. So I can kind of see how things will look on iOS. So if I click on this same thing, is it going to pop up with do you want to open this up in the... Yeah, so even this isn't necessarily showing the same results as the previous one, because perhaps the previous one had better reporting settings to have the server serve up some different content. But you have ways of at least viewing it, even though the functionality might be different. Okay, and then the last thing I was going to show you. So this is basically DevTools. You have this kind of functionality and interaction with the DevTools, and this is a fun little thing to know. Hitting F12 or going to More Tools, Developer Tools, Control-Shift-I looks like is another shortcut. But the other thing you can do is something called Bluestacks. Now, Bluestacks is a free emulator. Okay, remember I was saying how an emulator is like the real thing, but they've made a bunch of tweaks to it to make it easier or better for you as a user. BlueStacks helps to emulate Android devices, okay, like my phone, which I put down there for some reason. I can get apps. I can get apps on here just like boom, like I have on my phone. And here's a game that I play. It's not free though. Pirates Outlaws. I could install that and play it, the mobile game, from my computer, and it would play almost exactly like I'm playing on my phone. In fact, the developers of that game, of Pirates Outlaws, when you run the game, they actually have their own independent PC version. So go to Pirates Outlaws here. When I click on this to play it and run it, you'll actually see the Bluestacks emblem icon show up in my toolbar here because it's actually running the game on the Bluestacks emulator. So that's what the developers did to get it onto PC. They piggybacked off of this software, this emulator, and put their game on it and said, okay, whenever you run, just run with BlueStacks. And so when you install the game and when you run the game, it has its own miniature emulated version of this to play the game on. And so this is a great tool to use if you needed to test actual Android device software and functionality and the way it looks and behaves. And let's see if, gosh, I don't know how much of an inception thing we want to do here. Let's Chrome. Let's see if I can just get Chrome on here. Fast and secure. Open. Okay. So I'm opening up Chrome. And I'm sure over here there are lots of things I can do to like change the resolution and such. But right now it's emulating an Android device. Which one? I don't know. I haven't gone through the settings yet. But it's functioning and displaying as though it were an Android device. So here I'm going to Disney.com, and you can see it's taking a little bit of time because it's using fewer resources like a phone would be using. And so it's going to take a little bit longer to load it in than it's going to take on just my desktop by itself. So here I am at the top, and I had a pop-up that came up, and I don't know if you saw, but the way to close the pop-up was off the screen, so I couldn't interact with it. Like a perpetual pop-up, and those are terrible. But here I can scroll down. Things are a little bit laggy, and that's okay. I come to expect that. And things are loading in a little bit slower, like they would on a phone itself. And if I click on this, it's going to start loading in. And we're going to be able to see that page like we saw it before. But not exactly quite like it. It's still not saying Google Play stuff. Unless it's going to take a minute for it to say that because it's still detecting. Yeah, you can see up here it's still spinning, so maybe in a second here, once it actually gets done resolving, it'll figure out that I'm on an Android device and show me the proper options. Nope. There might be a setting over here I don't have on quite right. Anyway, Bluestacks is a great option for iOS. There are developer-specific tools that come built in with your developer writing software like Xcode that'll have its own emulator. Bluestacks is a good one for Android because it's free. You don't have to do any coding for it. Yeah, so that's basically the extent of my mobile knowledge when it comes to software testing. There are tools out there. There are free tools to use, but you have to take what you have available to you with a grain of salt, because you just know that you're going to measure the wrong thing using the wrong kind of system to help you measure it. So keep in mind the DOM. Keep in mind that different systems interact with the DOM in different ways. Please understand the difference between compatibility mode, an emulator, and a virtual machine. Understand that everything can have the same engine, which means it all functions the same way, even though it looks differently. Please know that just because things look differently doesn't mean it's going to behave differently. Maybe do some research on virtual machines and how you can set one up and start playing with one, because some people might say, I don't have a Linux system, so it's hard for me to start developing. You can get one for free. You can get VirtualBox, which is there are paid for versions, but you can get a free version of VirtualBox and get Ubuntu 18 for free and mount the Ubuntu 18 installer into the virtual machine, and when it boots up, it'll boot up like it's Ubuntu. And it will even give you the option to save the state, so that you can save it, close it, open it back up, reload back in that state, and now you're working as though you just paused the computer, even though it hasn't been running at all. Resolution just changes the width and the height of content on the page to see where some things have been left out, like that page on Disney where everything was centered except for the one box that was off to the side. The dev tools and how you can use them to see how the DOM is being interacted with, and how you could modify the output onto the screen to make the system think, make the browser think, not the browser, the server that you're accessing, think that you're using a different kind of device than an actual Chrome browser on a desktop. And then using Bluestacks to help with emulations of Android apps. Using all these tools, you can begin to gain some insight and developing some good habits with testing web applications and browsers using a mobile device. Again, it's never better than using the actual device itself, but they're good things to know about and good things to try and use. And there are tons of demos and introductions to how to use each of these, of how to use things in compatibility mode, of how to use emulators and virtual machines, how to properly use, and some cool things you can do with dev tools that just come with your Chrome. You don't have to install an extension or anything. You get Chrome and install it on a new system. You can hit F12 once that loads in, and you have the dev tools right there, always. Google builds it into it. They're always available for you. There are also awesome things you can do with Bluestacks and lots of demos you can find out there for those. So I'm going to end this here, and hopefully this is giving you some sort of insight to how to begin testing and in the realm of mobile application and browsers. It shouldn't be your go-to for doing mobile testing, but it should at least give you some of the basic information that you need to help propel you down that route if that's what you're wanting to do. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to. Yeah. So thank you so much for watching. I apologize for the length of the video again. And please let me know if you have any questions or comments in the comment section below. And if you had any kind of homework, the only homework I would give you is to figure out how to download VirtualBox. I don't care what system you're on. Download VirtualBox. Get an Ubuntu 16 or 18 installer. I'd say 18, but I think 16 or 17 might be more accessible or easier to get. Just get Ubuntu. and then figure out how to load your Ubuntu image into your virtual machine and boot it up. Even if you don't get anything else done, if you could figure out how to do that, you'll be in a good spot. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for watching. This is Kamiko Z signing off, saying thank you for watching, and again, thank you for watching.